Can you imagine being so completely, utterly out of options that a cold, concrete garage floor feels like a lifeline? That's where our story begins, on a night so thick with humid, southern despair that it felt like the very air of Savannah, Georgia, was trying to drown you. This is the story of Elara Vance, a name that sounds like a whisper of hope, but whose life, until recently, had been a deafening scream of struggle. Elara wasn't your typical movie heroine. She was real. She had the kind of deep, weary lines around her eyes that only come from years of trying to stretch a dime into a dollar, and the quiet, fierce determination of a mama bear protecting her cub. That cub, her 6-year-old son Leo, was the reason she kept breathing, kept fighting, kept pulling that ragged old suitcase from one temporary disaster to the next. Elara's dream wasn't extravagant. It wasn't a mansion on the bluff or a yacht in the harbor. Her dream was a tiny, affordable apartment where she could safely hang Leo's drawings on the fridge, the ones with the stick figure family and the ridiculously happy son. But life, as it so often does, had a wicked sense of timing. After her latest minimum wage job at a River Street cafe crumbled, a casualty of the off-season lull, and the room she was renting fell victim to a greedy landlord selling the property, Elara found herself exactly where she swore she'd never be: homeless. It wasn't just a physical displacement. It was a deep, soul-crushing failure. Savannah, with all its moss-draped beauty and antebellum charm, felt like a velvet-gloved fist punching her in the gut. The problem wasn't just money, it was time. Shelters were full. Friends were distant. The clock was ticking. And the one thing she refused to compromise on was Leo's safety. He was a sweet, bright boy, full of questions and wonder, and she couldn't let his world be defined by the anxiety in her voice. They had been sleeping in their beat-up sedan, an old Ford Focus affectionately named the Turtle, for 3 nights. But a freak torrential downpour had soaked through the leaky trunk and started mildewing their few remaining belongings. That's when the desperation hit. She had to find shelter. Now, driving aimlessly through the historic district, where the homes were stately and the oak trees dripped with Spanish moss, Elara spotted it. A large 3-car garage set slightly back from an impressive, but somewhat unassuming brick house on Taylor Square. The garage door was old, weathered wood, and crucially, it looked like it hadn't been secured properly. A small, almost invisible gap at the bottom hinted that the latch might be old or broken. She pulled the Turtle to the curb a block away, her heart drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She waited, watching the house for any sign of movement. Hours crawled by. The house was silent, dark. It looked empty. Maybe the owners were out of town. Maybe they were just rich and didn't even use the space. "Mama, are we playing hide and seek?" Leo whispered, snuggled under a thin blanket in the back seat, his voice heavy with sleep. Elara forced a smile. "The best game, sweetie. Now, I need you to stay very, very quiet. We're going to find a super secret, dry place to sleep, just for one night, okay?" She couldn't bring the car. Too risky. With a silent prayer to a god she hadn't spoken to in years, she carefully helped Leo out. Clutching his little dinosaur backpack and her own purse, she crept up the driveway. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and jasmine. The old garage door groaned in protest as she delicately, inch by careful inch, lifted the corner, enough for them to slide underneath. The sound, even muffled by the storm, felt deafening. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of gasoline and old wood. It wasn't immaculate, but it was dry. There were a few large, dusty tarps stacked in the corner. She pulled one down, spread it out, and made a small, makeshift nest for Leo. He curled up instantly. Exhausted, Elara leaned against a workbench, watching the shadows dance in the faint light filtering from the small window. She knew this was breaking and entering a huge risk. But the alternative was letting her son sleep in a cold, mildewed car. Survival had stripped away her judgment, leaving only instinct. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the shame and the fear. "Just one night. I'll be gone before dawn." Suddenly, a loud metallic click echoed from the driveway. Elara froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs, the sound of a heavy engine pulling into the driveway. Headlights, bright, blinding beams, cut through the crack under the garage door. Someone was home. In a panic, she grabbed Leo, pulling him behind a stack of old tires. She held her breath, pressing the terrified little boy against her chest. The garage door vibrated slightly as a large, expensive SUV parked right outside. Then, the sound of a key turning in the main side door of the garage, the pedestrian door. The click of the handle, The door swung inward, casting a rectangle of porch light into the darkness. Standing silhouetted in the frame was an older man. He was tall, dressed in impeccably tailored, slightly damp clothing, and he carried a briefcase and a worn leather travel bag. He looked tired, stern, and completely intimidating. He didn't flip the light switch. He just stood there, taking in the dark space. Elara's mind raced. He's going to call the police. I'm going to lose Leo. The man shifted his weight, and as he did, his eyes swept the room. They stopped, right on the pile of tires where Elara and Leo were hiding. A long, agonizing moment of silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant patter of rain. Finally, the man spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that somehow managed to sound both commanding and profoundly weary. "That tarp you're under," he said without moving. "It's moldy. There's a clean one, folded on the shelf by the door. And if you're going to use my electricity, you should at least turn on the light so you don't step on anything." Elara's entire body went rigid. He knew they were there. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't called 911. He was offering a clean tarp. Who are you?" Elara managed, her voice barely a tremor. The man sighed, a heavy, world-weary sound. He reached over and flicked the main garage light switch. The sudden, harsh fluorescent light flooded the space, revealing the dust, the tools, the tires, and Elara, frozen in shame, shielding her terrified son. The man's eyes, the color of a stormy sea, looked right into hers. He didn't look angry or scared. He just looked disappointed. "I," he said, pulling a large gold keyring from his pocket, "am Arthur Sterling, and this is my garage. Now, since you're already here, you might as well tell me how long you plan on staying, because I'm flying out again at dawn, and I'll need to know whether to tell the housekeeper about the extra mouths to feed." He walked past them, unlocked a heavy-duty cabinet, pulled out a pristine first aid kit, and placed it on the workbench. He didn't look at them again. Elara stared at the kit, then back at the man who had just confirmed her greatest fear and simultaneously extended the most confounding, terrifying act of silent charity she had ever experienced. Who was this man? A good Samaritan? A lunatic? A trap? She knew, deep in her gut, that this moment, this simple, terrifying confrontation, was the beginning of something she couldn't possibly predict. She hadn't just broken into a rich man's garage. She had stumbled into the life of a complete enigma, the wealthy man who owned a house on Taylor Square, a man who didn't even yell when a single mother and her child were caught hiding behind his old tires. This Arthur Sterling. He was the moment that changed everything. And Elara, gripping Leo tightly, had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. Elara expected a lecture, a threat, or maybe even a swift call to the police. What she got instead was silence, a first aid kit, and a simple question about breakfast. That night, Arthur Sterling, the stern, immaculate man, had simply retreated into the big brick house without another word, leaving Elara utterly adrift in a sea of confusion and adrenaline. The next morning, Elara woke before the sun, the smell of strong coffee and ozone heavy in the air. Arthur was already in the garage, dressed in a crisp travel suit, tying a scarf around a garment bag. He didn't acknowledge her presence, but on the workbench, where the first aid kit had been, a thermos and 2 paper bags sat. "Milk and cereal for the boy, coffee and a muffin for you," he stated, his voice flat, not inviting conversation. "I'm gone for the week." The side door locks with a deadbolt. "The key is under the brick on the 3rd step. Don't touch the cars, don't leave a mess, and whatever you do, do not go into the house." He looked at her then. A brief, piercing glance. "I'll be back Friday afternoon. We will talk then. Until then, you are invisible. Understand?" Elara could only nod, tears stinging her eyes. It wasn't kindness in his tone, not exactly. It was more like a highly structured transaction, a temporary lease on a corner of his life. But it was safety. With a final, sharp click of his heel on the concrete, he was gone, leaving Elara and Leo alone in a garage that, for the first time in months, felt like a safe haven. The first few days were surreal. Elara established a routine of military precision. They were up before dawn, Leo playing quietly with his dinosaurs on the tarp. Elara would quickly wipe down their area, ensuring no trace of their presence remained. She'd walk a mile to the nearest laundromat to wash their few clothes, and use the library's computer to furiously search for jobs. Any job. A process that felt increasingly futile. Life inside the garage was one of quiet transformation. She began to notice the small things about Arthur's space. The tools were old but perfectly maintained. The workbench had a faint patina of wood stain, not just dust. There was an entire shelf dedicated to books. Not thrillers or beach reads, but heavy tomes on urban planning, architectural history, and property law. This wasn't just a rich man. This was a man who built things, a man with a singular driving focus. One afternoon, Leo, bored and restless, was tracing the grain of the concrete floor when he made a discovery. "Mama, look," he whispered, holding up a small, heavy key attached to a fob. It had fallen out of a stack of old blueprints. Elara picked it up. It wasn't the deadbolt key. This key had an ornate, almost antique head. The fob was a tiny, gold-plated miniature of a Roman column. She slipped it into her pocket, uneasy about the discovery, but quickly distracted by the need to find food. Meanwhile, Arthur's simple, strict instructions were a strange kind of salvation. Knowing they had shelter until Friday allowed Elara to apply for jobs with a clear head. She landed a temporary gig cleaning up a new Airbnb rental downtown, earning just enough cash to buy groceries and put gas in the Turtle. She felt the gnawing fear recede, replaced by a slow, steady pulse of hope. The transformation wasn't just external, it was internal. Elara started remembering who she was, not just single mom who failed, but Elara who loved to paint, Elara who was wickedly good at math. The stable floor beneath her allowed her mind to finally breathe. She thought about Arthur. Why did he help? She replayed the scene in her mind. His weary eyes, the tailored suit, the briefcase. He had looked disappointed, yes, but also lonely. She had seen that look before, in the eyes of people who had everything but connection. Friday arrived like a verdict. Elara packed everything, cleaned the garage meticulously, and stood by the door, ready to thank him and accept whatever fate he handed her. The familiar sound of the heavy SUV crunching gravel announced his return. Arthur Sterling walked in, looking exactly as he had left, stern, immaculate, and tired. He surveyed the garage. His eyes didn't miss the reorganized tools or the sparkling clean section of floor. "You cleaned up," he observed, setting his bag down. "You follow instructions. That's a rare quality, Mr. Sterling," Elara began, her voice shaking despite her resolve. "Thank you. You saved us. I have a little money now, enough for a deposit on a cheap room. I'll leave immediately." Arthur held up a hand. "I own property, Elara, not just this house. I own a lot of properties. 300, give or take a few commercial buildings." The number hit Elara like a physical blow. 300 properties. This man wasn't just rich. He was a titan of Savannah real estate. Her jaw went slack. The garage she was hiding in wasn't a corner of a home. It was a fraction of an empire. You're a landlord?" she whispered. "I am a developer," he corrected. "And I don't help people out of charity. I look for value." I saw a mother who prioritizes her child's safety above her own fear of the law. "That's a strong foundation." He walked over to a stack of old cardboard boxes and pulled out a large, rolled-up sheet of paper. He unfurled it. It was a blueprint. I have a property. A small, turn-of-the-century craftsman house on a quiet street in the Ardsley Park area. It's been recently rehabbed, everything new, but the last tenant defaulted. It's sitting empty. I was going to rent it out, but frankly, dealing with tenants is exhausting. He pushed the blueprint across the workbench. "Elara, I'm not offering you a lease. I'm offering you a job. The job is a simple one. Live in that house, keep it immaculate, pay the utilities, and when my son comes back from university, you can be the live-in manager for my foundation properties. It's a real job with a real salary." Elara stared at the blueprint, then at Arthur. "Why? Why me?" Arthur leaned against the workbench, his stern demeanor softening just a fraction. He finally looked less like a businessman and more like a human being carrying a heavy weight. "I had a daughter, Elara. She loved Savannah's historic homes. She passed away 10 years ago. Her favorite house was a small craftsman that looked exactly like this one." He tapped the blueprint. "She always wanted it to be a home again, not a rental unit. I need someone there who will treat it like a home." He pulled a set of keys, heavy and shiny, from his pocket. "The house is yours to live in, Elara. Not free, but for a token rent I'll deduct from your new salary. You're not a tenant. You're an employee. Go, take your son home." Elara was completely overwhelmed. The tears she had been fighting for days finally broke free. She was being offered a life, a home, a job, security, by the very man whose property she had trespassed on. "Mr. Sterling," she choked out, I don't know how to thank you." "Just take care of the house, Elara," he said, turning away. and start living your life. I've wasted too much of mine. He stopped at the door, his hand on the knob. Oh, and one more thing, he said, turning back. My son is graduating from Yale Law next month. He's moving back to Savannah to help me run the foundation. He'll be stopping by the house occasionally to check the inventory and familiarize himself with the area. His name is Julian. Be professional. With that, Arthur Sterling stepped out, pulling the door shut behind him. Elara stood alone in the garage, clutching the keys and the blueprint of her new life. A home, a job, a fresh start, and a son of the titan she owed everything to, who was about to step into her world. The revelation of Arthur's wealth and his daughter's memory was profound. But the arrival of Julian Sterling, that was the moment that set the stage for the final act. Elara and Leo moved into the little craftsman house in Ardsley Park, a pocket of Savannah famed for its quiet streets and stunning historic architecture. The house itself was perfect, sun-drenched, with a wraparound porch and a garden that needed only a little love to burst into life. For the first time, Leo had his own room, a bright yellow sanctuary where his dinosaur collection could roam free. And Elara, she finally got to hang up that stick figure drawing on a pristine white refrigerator. It was more than a house, it was a psychological exhale. Weeks turned into a glorious, peaceful month. Elara threw herself into her new job, organizing Arthur's foundation property inventory with the precision he admired. She felt strong, capable, and most importantly, anchored. She was still pinching herself, grateful for the sheer randomness of the grace that had been shown to her. The first time Julian Sterling came to the house, it was on a humid Saturday afternoon. Elara was covered in potting soil, having just replanted a neglected patch of azaleas. A sleek black sedan pulled up, and out stepped a man who was the complete antithesis of his father. Arthur Sterling was all granite and sharp edges. Julian was warm, approachable, with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and a comfortable, easy confidence. He was perhaps a few years older than Elara, dressed casually in an untucked linen shirt. "You must be Elara," he said, walking up the porch steps. His voice was smooth, educated, a melody of old-money Southern charm. "I'm Julian Sterling. My father mentioned you. Said you were handling things here." "I am Mr. Sterling." "Welcome," Elara replied, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "I have the inventory files set up in the spare room. Can I get you some iced tea?" Julian laughed, a genuine hearty sound. "Please call me Julian. An iced tea would be a miracle. You know, Dad didn't really tell me he had hired someone. He just sent me an address and said, 'Check in with the manager.' He's a man of few, efficient words." Over the next few weeks, Julian's visits became more frequent. He wasn't just checking the inventory. He was staying. He'd bring Leo a new book. Never a toy, always a book. And then sit with Elara on the porch, discussing property foundation logistics, which quickly morphed into talks about old movies, Leo's latest exploits, and the best place to get a late-night peach cobbler in Savannah. He was different. He didn't talk about money or Yale Law. He talked about his passion for preserving Savannah's history and his fear that his father's relentless acquisition was starting to chip away at the city's soul. Elara found herself looking forward to the quiet hum of his sedan arriving. She found herself laughing with him, really laughing, for the first time in years. They had an undeniable chemistry, a comfortable, deep-rooted connection that felt both inevitable and terrifying. The great revelation came on a Tuesday, completely out of the blue. Julian was at the house, reviewing a deed on the dining room table. Elara was making coffee. Leo was upstairs playing. "You know, this house?" Julian began without looking up. "I remember coming here once with my sister 10 or 12 years ago. It was her favorite. She used to call this the secret garden house because of the overgrown garden." Elara's breath hitched. She remembered Arthur's weary eyes, his story about his daughter. "Your father mentioned her," Elara said softly, placing the coffee down. "He said she loved the historic homes." Julian nodded, finally looking up, his eyes clouded with distant sadness. "She did. My dad never got over it. He's tough, but that loss, it broke him. He bought this house right after she passed. He said he needed to keep her favorite things safe." He paused, then asked casually, "So, what's your story, Elara? You're so sharp, so organized. How did you and my father meet?" Elara froze. The lie she'd constructed, that she was just a temporary job applicant, crumbled. She had to tell him. She owed Julian, who had become her friend, the truth. She sat down, took a deep breath, and told him everything. The failed job, the car, the terrifying night, the desperation, the broken garage door, the hiding behind the tires. She told him about the overwhelming shame and the shock of his father's controlled, silent mercy. "Julian," she finished, her voice raw, "I trespassed. I broke into your father's garage. I took shelter there because I had nowhere else to go. I wasn't an applicant. I was a desperate mother who committed a crime." Julian sat absolutely still, the deed in his hand. The silence stretched, thick and painful. Elara braced for the anger, the shock, the inevitable professional dismissal. Then, Julian slowly set the deed down and leaned back in his chair. He looked at Elara with an expression of profound, complex emotion. "You know," he said, a slow, gentle smile spreading across his face. "When I got back from Yale, my father told me he'd found a manager for the Ardsley Park house. He described you as a woman who knows how to prioritize security and possesses a fierce loyalty to her assets. I thought it was a very strange way to describe an employee." He paused, his eyes gleaming. "Now it makes perfect sense. He didn't see a criminal, Elara. He saw someone who understood the true value of shelter. He saw himself, the man who buys 300 properties to create a sense of absolute security. The Riviera Volta." Julian didn't judge her. He admired his father's strange act of grace. "The real reason I keep coming here, Elara," he continued, leaning forward, his voice low and serious. "The inventory is just an excuse. I don't care about the deeds." He reached across the table and gently took her hand, his thumb tracing a rough spot on her knuckles from the gardening. "I care about you, about Leo, about this house finally being happy again. Elara, I've fallen in love with you. I've fallen in love with the strength you possess, the mother you are, and the sheer, breathtaking grace with which you rose from that garage floor." Elara's heart pounded. The world tilted on its axis. The son of the man who saved her, the heir to the 300 properties, was in love with the woman who had hidden in his father's garage. Tears sprang to her eyes, this time not of fear or shame, but of pure, unadulterated relief and joy. "Julian," she whispered, unable to say anything more profound. They sat there, two people from impossibly different worlds, connected by a broken garage door, a memory of a sister, and the simple, undeniable truth of their shared affection, recognition and transformation. Elara, the woman who once hid in the darkness, was now sitting in the light, recognized and loved not in spite of her struggle, but because of the fire it had forged in her soul. She was no longer defined by the turtle or the damp concrete. She was defined by her resilience and her capacity for love. A year later, on a breezy spring day, Elara and Julian were married in the beautiful garden of the Craftsman house. Arthur Sterling, looking less stern and more relaxed than Elara had ever seen him, gave a surprisingly emotional toast. He didn't give her a house. He gave her a home and the means to sustain it. And Julian gave her a future she'd never dared to dream of. As the sun set over Savannah, Elara stood on the porch, watching Julian gently push Leo on a tire swing they'd hung from the ancient oak tree. She was a mother, a wife, a property manager, and she was safe. The little Craftsman house, the house that represented a lifetime of sorrow for Arthur and a fresh start for Elara, was finally complete. It was a home built not on concrete, but on a foundation of mercy, honesty, and unexpected love. Narrator. What Elara found in that cold, hard garage wasn't just shelter. She found an empire of grace, a home, and a family. Never forget that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden right behind the darkest moments of your life. All it takes is one person to look past the surface and see the value in a desperate soul. If this story touched your heart, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next powerful true story.